Welcome. It is expected that by 2050, the temperature of the Earth will increase by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like much, but it is pretty significant. Unlike many Canadians of the older generation, my generation might not need to flee south when they retire. Instead, we can just wait for 50 years and warmer climate will reach us anyway. Not that we will be able to retire anyway, but at least we can dream. We often blame industry and technological development for the CO2 emissions that destroy our atmosphere. But what if the origin of the climate change is way deeper in our civilization? This video is a part of a little series that I'm making where I look at different literature across the political compass. And today we're going completely off the map to explore Anarcho Primitivism. Specifically, I will be looking at this book, Future Primitive by Jhon Zerzan. Jhon Zerzan is one of the most recognized Anarcho-Primitivist authors. In this video, we will unwind the roots of the climate change and see if Anarcho-Primitivism may be our inevitable future. So let us give a brief introduction to what Anarcho-Primitivism actually is. It is a political movement that has one hand in the anarchism, meaning it rejects all sorts of hierarchy and government, and the other foot in nature. Nature has one of the highest value for the Anarcho-Primitivists. You may think that this sort of political ideology is way too wild, and I was thinking so too, until I read the book and realized that Jhon Zerzan has pretty valuable input, especially the one applicable to climate change. Though I still didn't get those 30 pages where he talks about tonality and harmonious music of the past generation and how the perfect society would actually have harmonious music that everybody likes, but we'll just ignore that chapter. So my friends, we are destroying the environment. That was predicted by the 19th century researchers and has been proven by the 20th and 21st century researchers. Climate change and its causes are addressed even by the biggest emitters in the world, such as gas and oil companies. We often blame the industrial evolution for the climate change, but Jhon Zerzan suggests that the roots are going way deeper. I would like to put a note over here that I am not an expert in anything environmental, and I'm just looking at Anarcho-Primitivism as political ideology. So we have been burning things throughout the human history consistently. We have been heating our houses or warming food. Taming fire was one of the first human discoveries back in millions of years ago. But now we don't just emit CO2 for warming our houses or for cooking our food. We emit CO2 for largely energy. Energy is used to fuel our institutions, governments, agricultural and industrial complexes, and also exchange of the information. We are not dependent on the fossil fuels as much as we're dependent on the energy itself. So we are currently in the information age, and Jhon Zerzan has a couple of issues with where we stand right now. For one, we're not eating the type of food that is fit for our bodies, and we're not doing the work that is fit for our bodies either. None of us were made to sit and look at the papers and screens for days upon end. There is also an issue with the isolation. Our society was divided into states, neighborhoods, little towns, and then we were also divided into families, and then the families broke apart because we're not meant to live in isolated pairs, and now we're left alone, living in our individual square cells, staring at our individual square screens. As Jhon Zerzan notes, it's no surprise that we have such a widespread of mental issues. None of the animals are meant to live in little zoo cells, and neither are we. As we enter the information age, we also face the overload of the information. Our brains are simply not fit for processing this amount of information that we face every single day. And of course, post-truth. With the amount of the information, now we can't distinguish what is a truth or a lie. This is one of the reasons you see the uprising in the conspiracy theories, because we're simply not fit to process the information in such a volume. But information revolution is not exactly the origin of our problem with the climate change and CO2. Most often CO2 emissions are attributed to industrial revolution. An industrial revolution is when we started to pump in carbon into the atmosphere, especially the second industrial revolution. That's around 18th, 19th century. And indeed, industrial revolution is the origin of a lot of our CO2 emissions. But Jhon Zerzan has some objections once again to the industrial age. Industrial revolution also was known for unsafe work and things like child labor and unpaid labor. It is also the origin of the division of labor, or splitting our work into sub-little tasks and then putting one person to do one little task again and again. Jhon Zerzan strongly objects to the division of labor, saying that it is one of the reasons why we have so much mental problems in the current age, because we are simply not meant to be doing the same thing in a large repetition over and over. An industrial revolution is also the origin of technology, one of the biggest nemesis of the Anarcho-Primitivists. It may seem to you that technology is beneficial, but Jhon Zerzan objects. He actually says that technology is always a double-edged sword. You cannot develop nuclear energy reactors without also developing nuclear weapons. You cannot develop fertilizers without also developing chemical weapons. And you cannot develop AI and AI assistance without also developing AI weapons. The upscale destruction of the environment environment for an anarcho-primitivist is originating in the technology and technological development. So is also an energy dependence. Anarcho-primitivism sees technology as a sort of the destruction tool for the environment. More optimistic researchers today look to resolve climate change issues by providing more technology. But what Jhon Zerzan says is that you cannot buy your way out of climate change. Our future lies in AI or augmented reality or maybe even space exploration. But what Jhon Zerzan says is that we are falsely hoping for this circular loop of consumption. But in reality, this is just the spiral destructional downfall. You cannot close the circle of consumption and the destruction of the environment because it is simply not a circle. The technology that we may develop in the future, such as supplying energy and using lithium batteries or exploring other planets and taking resources from there, will have their own downfall. Jhon Zerzan suggests that after we exited a hunter-gathering society, all of our civilizational development has been a constant cycle of a downfall. Civilizations rise and fall because they are simply not sustainable. And we keep band-aiding our technological problems by more technology. Specifically, something like recycling can be used as a good example because that is one of the industries that tries to resolve the technological destruction by slapping in more technology. But we're not done yet. What Jhon Zerzan proposes is that the origin of our problems with the climate change and CO2 emissions is not laying within the Industrial Revolution or our technological age. He says that the worst thing that ever happened to us after having a hunter-gatherer society was the agricultural revolution. So about 12,000 years ago, our ancestors discovered that you can work the land for food. You can also tame the animals by putting them in little pens and feeding them whatever you don't eat and then eating those animals instead. Which seems like a good idea until you think it through. As soon as we realize that we can work land became of value. Now you suddenly had the land rights, and once you have the land rights, you also need some institutions and governments that will control the land rights. You will also need the police and jurisdictions that protect your land rights. You will also need the punishment system such as jurisdiction and prison to punish those who do not obey the land rights. After you capture the idea of the land rights, you can also use the force to capture the land from your weaker neighbors. You can work animals on your land, and if you think it through, you can also work people on your land, meaning that the origins of the slavery are also tied to agricultural revolution. The first source of energy that people started to exploit was actually animals and other humans. Once you have land rights, you also need a system to pass the land through the generations, which also means that you need to control childbearing in women. You need to make sure that all the women have kids that are needed for the family, and the kids are only coming from the particular man who has the right of land. In addition, once you have the land rights, you need a system of money or currency so you can trade the land or trade your yields. And this, by the way, is a common way of thinking of anarchism, and it has some support in research. That once you start having a cultural society revolution, you start thinking about money, prison, government, patriarchy, slavery, and things like that. Even though I did read other anarchy texts before, this is the first book that ties all four together, from the agricultural revolution to our post-informational age. This book provides the whole framework for how we consume our environment and how we use our resources. This book also provides a really solid objection to why we cannot solve climate change by slapping on more technology on top of existing technology. And it's a common joke that primitivists are living like monkeys with stones and sticks, but this is not true. We coexisted with the nature for around 2 million years and co-evolved with it. There are some hunter-gatherer tribes that remain today, and hunter-gathering was quite common in the Americas until the colonization took over. Hunter-gathering society also has way less people, not in the sense that more people need to die or the population needs to be controlled. Ideas of controlling the population of people are often linked to ecofascism, which anarcho-primitivism has nothing in common. The only objection that I have, and which Zerzan doesn't really address in his book, is what do you do with all the people with disabilities or those born and depending on the medical support? Because what he says in the book is just that in the society of hunter-gatherers, everybody is so healthy and cheerful that they just never get sick. He also claims that women can control their fertility by staying in tune with the nature. And I'm not a big fan of the golden age idea. Every time I see it in the literature, it feels to me that author just tries to cover something up or just not say something. So yes, we coexisted with the nature for around 2 million years, running pretty sustainably. So how do we get back there? And Jhon Zerzan provides no answer in this book whatsoever. Quite literally, he has a lot of criticism and no solutions. And I thought that this is just one book problem, but apparently this is a common criticism of this author. Zerzan just criticizes modern society, but is shy to provide any sort of solution. So I ended up going on Reddit and asking people and reading from there. That's how you do research, okay? So one solution is return to nature. And the problem with return to nature is that it is sort of of illegal. Like, you cannot live on the land because most of the land is owned by either people or the government, and then if you are living on the land that is not officially owned by anybody, you can get displaced anytime if somebody buys that land or government decides to use it. So you can buy your own land, but in that case you remain a statist, so it's not a true anarchy. There are some governmental programs like the one in Wales that look into letting people live off the land, but this is not a common thing. A lot of anarcho-primitivists are living either on their own land or alone somewhere in the nature. And living as isolated individuals or isolated pairs is not exactly how the hunter-gatherer society is structured. One other way to reach the primitive state is the active revolution. The idea of the individual unorganized people working the same time to destroy the institutions and technology that we have today to the point of no return. And once we reach the point of no return, we can go and live in nature. Which of course is a little bit of a wild idea simply because having unorganized worldwide revolution doesn't seem feasible. And of course we're left with inevitable, with the climate collapse. To feed our current society, we rely on stable climate. Stable climate and agricultural technology are able to feed 7 billion people. Actually, I think it's around 8 billion right now. But no matter how much technology we have, it's simply impossible to farm in the unstable climate. Farmers need to have at least some idea to which crops they're planting on the land or which animals they need to hold to make sure that they provide the yield in next year. So if we keep emitting the CO2, we will see more climate crisis in the future. We might reach the point of no return with our temperatures, and we can see the climate temperatures rising more and more extreme weather across the globe. All of those factors will affect the agriculture. Once the agriculture system is failing, we will reach the mass starvation. Unstable climate and agricultural decline will cause border insecurity and also internal displacement of people. We can see a lot of refugee crises and whole countries disappearing underwater. A lot of the stronger states may try to attack the weaker states, especially if the weaker state still has an agricultural potential. And of course, internally, there will be people attacking each other, specifically more poor people in disparity attacking the rich, because rich people will be able to afford better lifestyle for longer. We will also see more disease coming in, new diseases like COVID and the ones from our past, which can be far worse. All of that is going to continue until the full institutional collapse, and we end up living as primitives by having no other choice. There is expected to be some sort of self-organization and building off of the society as the post-technological primitive society. People are highly adaptable, so it is reasonable to expect that at least some of the population survive and will self-organize in a new primitive post-technological society. So this was Future Primitive by Jhon Zerzan and my look at the Anarcho Primitivism. I started off this journey by thinking that Anarcho Primitivism will be a fun and wacky ideology to pick for this video series, but as I was reading through, I kind of realized that this is one of the political ideologies that fully understands the scope and the problem of the climate change. This actually may be the only ideology that truly understands the climate change. Thank you for joining me today, and if you would like me to review some of the books or ideologies in the future, leave me a comment below. Otherwise, see you on the next book. You know, I already started this series being sort of left and pretty much anti-state, and then I feel like I'm just going to drop off the political compass edge by the end of this series.